Hello, folks. So this evening I'm going to be talking about social services and care homes. The reason I want to talk about this is following a conversation I've recently had with a friend of mine, Tony Stowell, who's been carrying out a campaign to improve monitoring in care homes to make it safer for residents. Now, Tony's campaign and Tony's law is in honour of his late mum. The reason he has established this campaign is regrettably his mum was one of the was someone who suffered from abuse in the care home system, and as a result of this, Tony has effectively acted to see reforms in how we monitor residents or relatives in the care home system, and calling for measures to allow family members to be able to have monitoring systems put in place, such as CCTV, across the care homes where they can effectively check on their elderly relatives or the vulnerable relatives and be able to just check in on how they're doing. And this can be something as simple as putting a smartphone, as an example as the one that I'm talking to now, on a charging facility which is in view of our elderly or vulnerable residents, where their relative can effectively Skype in or call them, where the phone effectively is monitoring and recording what is going on and effectively acting as a safeguard that when vast majority of the abuse would occur, which would be in the resident's room, so making sure that further safeguard is put in place so that our mothers, our fathers, our grandparents are safeguarded and protected as they should be and feel safe in that environment. Now, as well as this, there are certain areas that I will also broadly touch on, but the main thing that we discussed in conversation was broadly speaking about care homes in general, and we do both admire the amount of work that our frontline care staff and our frontline doctors and nurses have put on during the pandemic, and they've gone truly above and beyond for all of us. And the main thing that we need to also do, and we both were in agreement with this, was recently with elements such as their contracts to make sure that we have retain those quality staff in the care system and that they are paid suitably. That we can't have systems where we have staff who are expected to be on overnight shifts and where they are expected to be engaged and alert to residents' needs, where they aren't being duly compensated and duly paid for their service, and making sure that they are paid fairly effectively making sure they're fairly paid to be able to look after our relatives in the middle of the night and to be able to actively engage and do their job and look after them in a fit way. Otherwise, regrettably, what we are potentially going to see is if there are facilities where we broadly speaking, can ensure that they retain we retain these staff members, we're going to see the cases where there's going to be staff members who are going to leave the care system to potentially go and work elsewhere, and potentially then take away from our relatives' quality of care because we'll lose those hard-working and well-meaning staff members. Now, other elements that we discussed more broadly was effectively making sure that, as well as monitoring in the rooms and making sure that our relatives have facilities where we can look after them and that family members can effectively check in. We also need to make sure that care homes, especially for those who may have lost their faculties, can effectively make sure that we know that our relatives are safe and that they don't, for example, wander off site because systems that are in place aren't able to adequately keep track of them, and we need to make sure that these provisions are there so that we can effectively make sure that we know if, for example, that some resident has left their room and gone to an exit, that the exit is, broadly speaking, going to send some form of trigger warning or notification to a member of staff to alert them that someone has potentially gone out of this exit. And these are very small things that can be put in place to maximize that security system. And by having these security measures in place, it's not to take away from the relatives' freedoms and liberties. It is purely there as an additional safeguard if it's required. And as with other residential care facilities, sign-in systems where relatives can just as you're checking that relatives are coming and going, that we are aware of effectively, if, let's say that a particular individual is more able to go and is more effectively able to continue to engage and take part in society more broadly, we need to make sure that they are able to do that for as long as possible. But if, for example, a member of the care home residence hasn't checked in after a certain time, they have some form of device where the care home staff are alerted that they haven't come back after a certain time, or they haven't checked in, and that could be something as simple as technology, which is in smartwatches, or broadly speaking, in facilities such as the alarm necklaces and so on for falls, or for alert bracelets and so on, that we know, broadly speaking, that there's some way of effectively making sure that if something happens to a resident when they're outside of the care home, that there's facilities in place to get back in touch with them, or to get urgent care in some cases to them. Now, other things that we broadly need to discuss with social services and care home facilities is to make sure that not only are these the care homes are placed, that they are still part of the communities and they aren't at the fringes of communities, but making sure that the lifelines to these care homes, whether that be bus networks or making sure they're a commutable walk from a bus stop, so not only that the care staff can get to these to get to work, but that residents can potentially still continue to engage and move from town to town if they so want to, because what we don't want to see is the cases of isolation, as Tony and I were both discussing, the impacts that isolation can have on both, broadly speaking, the larger population as well as the care home staff, care home residents as well. The other thing that we need to address here is, when we think of care homes, we sometimes think of facilities for more elderly residents, but there are also cases of where we have vulnerable care units or care homes for younger people. And these units as well are effectively set up so that there is still a level of autonomy that these residents can have, and they have the necessary care that allows them to have the different needs provided for them, but that they can still engage in society, whether that be the activities that keep them mentally engaged and feeling connected to their communities, and a lot of the volunteer works that are going on throughout the year normally to engage with care home staff and care home residents, such as the care mental health dogs and wellbeing animals, which will go in. All volunteer groups such as Scouts and the Cinnamon Trust will also, broadly speaking, engage and provide additional care for, or not additional care, but additional resources for care home residents to provide effectively an additional stimulus for them. And when we think of important to our family units, that we need to make sure that they have all these facilities provided for them. And broadly speaking, councils are recognising the additional change in community care that needs to happen and needs to be improved. And councils are working to ensure that care homes are getting more resources. But as myself and Tony were discussing, these resources need to be going through to both the facility and they need to be going to the staff members. We need to make sure that the staff we're getting the staff who are retained in the system by being paid appropriately, and we are making sure that the facilities are safe enough and secure enough that relatives feel that the residents of the care homes are in the safest and most comfortable areas that they can be. And this is effectively something that we should all be passionate about, regardless of whether you've been affected by this personally or if you have relatives who have not had to go into the care home system, but broadly speaking have had at-home carers, and making sure that these at-home carers are equally given these provisions, because it will affect the entire system, and it should not just be the difference of where the top-run facilities in the country are getting better care than those in other parts of the country. And what we were discussing is that the management systems which are put in place need to effectively make sure that these systems are providing these additional funds to the front line where they're needed. And councils and other organisations who have monitoring responsibilities should be working towards systems of where we are checking that there's best value for residents and the taxpayers by making sure that we are going in at random intervals and making sure that these are completely anonymous searches where centres aren't necessarily getting the notification that someone is about to visit. The reason this needs to happen, and I'm a strong believer of this, is we need to ensure that the care homes are effectively giving us a fair reflection of what is going on. And that's not to say if care home staff are struggling, that means that the care home needs to be sanctioned or further scrutinised. It simply means that we need to be aware of further provisions that need to be provided, and we need to be able to recognise where problems in management or problems in facilities might be occurring and what provisions can be put in place to improve that. Now, monitoring systems are something that needs to be a key part of this, whether that be inspection monitoring or whether that be general security and well-being monitoring, such as Antonia's Law campaign. Now, if, in my belief, we have the better monitoring systems and it's supportive monitoring visits, then generally speaking, we should see a trend of improvement. We should see staff where the staff are able to effectively reflect what their challenges are day to day, and then councils and other organisations can take action to ensure that the care home management are putting in provisions in place to make it a safer and better work environment for staff, and equally ensuring that it's a happier, comfortable facility for our members of society who need them. and that they are, broadly speaking, giving that peace of mind to